Hello, and welcome back. This is our lecture on market power and market structure. So, a recap, we've done the foundations, we know what perfect competition is, and we know monopoly. And now we're about to talk a little bit about overarching ideas when it comes to industrial organization and focus really on the structure of the market. Um, but then first, let's talk about the relationships between structure, conduct, and then performance, which is the SEP framework. All right. So the SEP framework, which is the structure, conduct, and performance framework, is a way for us to really understand the big picture ideas in industrial organization. Okay, so and this ties in also with some history with industrial economics. Early goals by industrial economists are to establish links between market structure and the conduct of firms in the market. So first, let's quickly define things. Market structure is the structure that we talked about in foundations, where you have two very general but very extremely different structures. You have perfectly competitive industries and markets on the one hand, and a monopolized market on the other, with only one seller being able to satisfy the entire market. Okay, and then you have those structures and the conduct or the behavior of firms in the market. Just to recap again, in our foundations, the structure had very, very firm implications on the conduct. Perfectly competitive firms, for example, are faced with the assumption of not price takers, and they cannot affect the price in the industry or in the market. Okay, and that means their conduct is really circumscribed. They only look at the price and then they act based on that information. Right, so that's just an example of how market structure leads to specific conduct of firms, and these are the links that these industrial economists want to really understand and study. And in turn, conduct would determine the likely performance or outcome of the market in terms of economic efficiency. So when it comes to performance or outcome, we're now looking at prices and quantities and profits, right? So market structure, there are links between market structure and conduct, and then there are links between conduct and performance. Okay, performance can be how much profit you have, and what are the prices? Are they high relative to some benchmark or low relative to some benchmark? So the basic principle behind the SCP paradigm, perfect competition and monopoly, are opposite ends of the spectrum of market structures along which all markets lie. Okay, so that's the basic theoretical idea, the two extremes. And in practice, economists are trying to accurately describe the structure of real-world markets, which don't necessarily fit the paradigmic descriptions of either monopoly, complete pure monopoly, or perfectly competitive markets. And then in practice, we're trying to derive relationships, empirical relationships between the structures and outcomes in terms of price cost margins, innovation, and other performance measures. All right, so the SCP says, or at least the interpretation of SCP by many of these early economists, is that the industry's performance, the success in producing benefits to consumers, prices, profits, welfare, and so on, depends on the conduct of the industry or the firms within the industry, which in turn depend on the structure, factors that determine competitiveness of the market, right? So if you have a picture, it will be this picture right here, right? Where you've got these basic conditions leading to structure, so this arrow, and then the structure leading to conduct, and then the conduct leading to performance. So it's this directionality, right? That is really the core of some of the early studies in industrial economics. Okay, and that's really also what we're going to try to do in the next few months, to link structure, conduct, and performance, particularly in this direction. Towards the end, and maybe if this were, if there were a more advanced IO class, in truth, there is the opposite relationship. Performance can affect conduct and structure. So it's not just structure affecting conduct, affecting performance, but actually performance and conduct can also affect structure. In fact, the last thing we're going to talk about would be dynamic games and games of foreclosure, which leads to antitrust and sort of regulating the conduct of firms in the market. That is essentially where we're trying to, that motivates why that's something that happens in the modern world by antitrust agencies. Why antitrust agencies look at various conduct, because not only because conduct affects performance, but conduct also affects structure. And in particular, we're interested in conduct that sorts of walls off industries or markets against entry, and therefore contributes to the monopolistic structure of that market. Okay, so we'll be talking about entry and how conduct affects entry later on. Specifically, where really I'm looking forward to like the last 2 weeks, and I can tell you that we'll spend some time doing work on vertical relationships by abusive or potentially abusive monopolistic dominant firms who do conducts that not only raise prices or restrict output, which is performance, but they would also tend to stop other competitors from growing in the market, or even stop potential entrants from entering the market. So that's the exciting part, but that will come later on, and we need to develop the ideas first, linking structure to conduct, and then from conduct to performance. Okay, so now let's move on. We're skipping a lot. So a lot of this history will come in later. I'll try to reintroduce this history later on. But now, what I guess we want to say in the second week is we need to understand market structure and how to measure market structure. And this is the sort of thing that we at the Philippine Competition Commission try to do regularly to the extent that the data is available. And other competition agencies around the world also do the same thing. Okay, so we have measures of market structure here, which are concentration curves, concentration ratios, and the Herfindahl-Hirschman index, which we will always refer to as HHI. Okay, so these are some statistics that we will now study. So a concentration curve describes the extent to which output is concentrated in the hands of just a few firms, and it permits one to have a quick sense of how industry production is allocated across firms. So what you would do is you'd rank firms by some sort of measure of size or production, calculate the fraction of the industry's total output that is accounted for the largest, then the 2 largest, then the 3 largest, and then plotting the relationship, and that yields the concentration curve. Okay. If you were to study, say, inequality or poverty, this is very similar to something called a Gini coefficient. Okay. So let's look at that concentration curve here. So industry A, 10 firms each with 10% market share, right? So that means you're here, 10, it's a little curve, but this 10 goes all the way up here, and then this 0 is here. And if you were to stretch this out, this is actually sort of like a straight line, single line here, that says that 100% of the market is controlled by all of the 10 firms, right? And then the first firm controls 10, the top 2 controls 20, the top 3 controls 30, and so on and so forth. Okay. And here you have different ones, like for industry B, 21 firms, the largest, so 21, it stretches all the way out here. The largest has a 55% market share. So first firm goes here, and then the rest are even, so it's just a straight line between 1 to 21 here, right? And so on and so forth. As you can see, depending on the number of firms, right, because the x-axis here is the number of firms, the most even one is something like A, because it connects the 0 to 100, and 100 is, and this is just a straight line, which implies that all of the firms have the same percent of production, right? They're evenly distributed. Whereas if there are these kinks, like in B and in C, then that will show you that there's at least one firm with a very, very big share, right? And then the rest is, if there are two lines only, the rest is evenly distributed. So you can see that here. So a form of the CR or concentration ratio is the N firm concentration ratio, defined for any N. So N is like a number of firms. The percent of industry sales accounted for the top N firms. So a CR4, usually we calculate a CR4. The 4-firm concentration ratio is the percent of industry sales accounted for by the top 4 firms. Okay. So these correspond to particular points in the firm's concentration curve. Right? So the principal drawback is it omits the other information from that concentration curve, and it focuses only on the top 4. Now, here's the HHI. Here it says HI, but I would prefer to call it HHI, is the sum of squares of the market share, right? Where SI is the market share of the firm. And market share is measured the usual way, like 30 for 30%, 40 for 40%, and so on. HI is the sum of the market shares of sum of the squares of the market shares of all the firms in the industry. Pure monopoly is 1 or 10,000, because 100 squared is 10,000. Okay. Strong advantage is that it reflects the combined influence of both unequal firm sizes as well as the concentration of activity in a few large firms. It has the ability to reflect both the average firm size and inequality of size between firms that lead economists to prefer HI to simple concentration ratios. Okay, so here is an example computation for HHI. You have, this is the market share here. Then you square them and then you sum them. So for this particular industry, with 10 firms, you have 2,000 of HHI. Again, the maximum is 10,000. So this is looking okay, right? And then you can calculate the different HHIs from the different industries. The one that was introduced for during the concentration ratio. And I invite you to look at these. So notice that industry A has the smallest one, because the smallest one is typically the one where all of the shares are equally or evenly distributed. Industry C is also fairly distributed, but industry B, this is the one with, let's just go back. For industry B, one firm has more than half, right, of the market share. And that's why the HHI is this large, right? Because it's that much larger than an industry A, right? Because one firm has 55% of the share. And industry B is also more unequal than industry C at 2,000. So again, I invite you to recalculate these ones for the different examples we presented earlier. Well, we already did that. We already did that here, and I invite you to do the calculations on your own. So the market definition, in the Philippines, we usually use standard industry classifications called the Philippine Standard Industry Classification, or the PSIC, right? So together with the annual survey of business and industry and the CPBI, the Philippine Census of Philippine Business, we can generate HHIs for each most disaggregated PSIC, which happens to be the PSIC 5. Okay. So the drawback of these industry classification systems is that they're based more on production technologies. So if you were to look at the PSIC code book, it would lump together all of the seasonal planting varieties. For example, if you looked at the agriculture one, and then it would lump together fishing, generally speaking, all kinds of fishing and whatnot, right? They're both based on production technologies and less on whether the outputs of the different establishments compete with one another. So market shares are calculated based on national market. So it's possible actually to use the ASPBI and the CPBI, our surveys, to do like provincial HHIs, but those are too few and far between to do it. Not all surveys are able to do it. But generally, if you were to use these surveys, they are national in scope, and therefore the HHIs are national. But then later we'll be talking about how competition can be understood at a very specified geographic area, right? Such as a region or a city or a province, or even something less specific like the area between two provinces and so on, right? Okay, so the best way or a better way to do it is not just to use production similarity, but to use actual measures of substitutability between various goods. So you've got this formal measure of substitutability called the cross-price elasticity of demand, which is something that you've probably encountered in your past classes, which we will say here, which we'll describe here as eta, but then specifically it's eta ij, which is the cross-price elasticity of I and j. And here we have the definition of that, and that I is the price that's changing, and J is the price that's changing, goods price that's changing, and I is the quantity that is changing in response to that. So typically, if they are substitutes, if the price of good J goes up, then the quantity of good I demanded should go up, because people who used to buy product J are substituting into product I, right? The elasticity is large and positive if goods in I and J are considered as reasonably close substitutes. But what is large and positive is not so clear, and how to define markets based on market definition or based on the cross-price elasticity is not so clear. But competition agencies, the agencies which really use this concept of market definition a lot, and we'll be revisiting market definition later on in this course, is that we use something practical called this one, SNP, a small but significant non-transitory increase in price standard. We will continue discussing this in the second part of this video. Thank you.